Morning. Hey, it's a Sunday of welcome back, Jeanette. Welcome back. Who else do I have? Welcome back. Who else haven't I seen for a while? Welcome back. Welcome back. So it is like a Thanksgiving service before that. Daniel 12. That's going to be our first reading today. Daniel 12, we're just going to read the first 4 verses. Now, I have a chapter heading, and mine says, The Time of the End. Now, you know Daniel is a very prophetic book. We're not going to dig into all of that, but we're just going to pick up a little bit here. Now, at the time, Michael, this is the archangel Michael, okay? So now, at the time, Michael, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise. And there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, your people, everyone who is found written in the book, will be rescued. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, but the others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. Those who have insight will shine brightly like the brightness of the expanse of heaven, and those who lead the many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But as for you, Daniel, conceal these words. Seal up the book till the end of time. Many will go back and forth, and knowledge will increase. Lord in heaven, I love you. Lord, I know that at the end of all things, when you call your family, when you call your children back home again, there's going to be a great unveiling of what is. Lord, I don't pretend to understand what all that is going to look like. But I know that it's going to be this epic, monumentous thing. Lord, I pray that when the books are opened, that my name is in there. Lord, I pray when the books are opened, that all of the names that sit here before me today, that their names are in there. Lord, I pray that all that we love, that all that we call family, that all that we call friend, Lord, I pray their names are in there. Lord, I pray that all of these names are in there, Lord, because we're down here doing what we're supposed to do. And that is sharing your name to the benefit of our names. Lord, please unite us to the church body with that prayer that Jesus taught us to pray so many years ago. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. Last night in service when we said the Lord's Prayer, we do the trespasses version. And this morning downstairs when we said the Lord's Prayer, we did the sins version. And then up here we do the debts version. When you start asking yourself, okay, where am I standing? Which version are we doing? All right, John 11. John 11. John 11, Jesus said to her, words in red. Jesus is saying, if it's in red, we're going to what? We're going to believe it. Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. Let's pick up the context of that. Let's go back to the beginning of the chapter. Stay in chapter 11, beginning of the chapter. Tell me what your chapter heading says. The death of Lazarus. Anybody have anything different? Death and resurrection of Lazarus. What'd you have? Lazarus becomes sick and dies. Okay. Who's Lazarus? Brother of Martha and Mary. Okay. Verse 1, now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was the same Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Anita, we love you. And if Steve wants to anoint your feet with his hair today, we're going to let him. Verse 3, so the sisters sent word to him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. When Jesus heard this, he said, this sickness is not to end in death, but for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified by it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he then stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Isn't it interesting that St. John writes in verse 5? It's like he wants you to make sure that you know that Jesus does love Lazarus. Then he also loves Martha, and he also loves Mary, so that in verse 6 he could tell you, so he stayed an extra 2 days where he was. Let's skip over to verse 17. So when Jesus came, he found that he had already, meaning Lazarus, had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off. But many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. Martha, therefore, when she heard that Jesus was coming, went to meet him, but Mary stayed at the house. You guys can picture the scene. All right, a loved one is dead, family, friends are gathering. They hear that Jesus is coming. Mary is holding court. She's at the house. Somebody's still got to be the host. All right, Mary's making sure that everybody's got something to eat, that she's got a kind word for everybody. You guys have all been there, but Martha, I'm going to go see Jesus. Martha says to Jesus in verse 21, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give to you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection of the last day. I'm going to stop right there. When I was preparing for this sermon, I got to that spot and I went, what did Martha just say? I know that he will rise again on the last day. Is Martha Methodist? Is she Baptist? Is she Roman Catholic? Is she Presbyterian? What is she? She's Jewish. Jesus is not the risen Lord. Not at this point. Jesus hadn't gone to the cross yet. Martha said, I know that he will rise again on the last day. And that stumped me because I went, well, you got to remember that timeline. I thought, well, wait a minute. How do they even know about a resurrection yet? And so that got me flipping through the Old Testament, looking for things. And there's this place that we read in Daniel 12 that we read as our reading, where it says, in the last day when the books are opened, they will rise up out of the dust, and some to eternal life and some to eternal death. They're calling that a resurrection. I said, okay, that's Old Testament stuff. Valley of the dry bones, you remember that story? Okay, the valley of the dry bones, they're standing in the precipice, looking down into this valley. Skeletons everywhere. They start to rise, and flesh comes to their body. But there's a context to that story. And the context of that story is that Israel will be reunited. So is it really like resurrection as in my brother is going to be resurrected? It's vague. And so it got me digging around. You know, remember you've heard me describe the ping pong balls bounce around in my head? I have to tell a story to get us to this place that we understand why Martha was saying that. Now, the story is it's not a terribly long story. I got plenty of time, and we're going to start with Alexander the Great. Now, Alexander the Great was born about 350 years before Martha said it. In fact, I think Silva said that she had him in the first grade. See, that wasn't too bad, right? That wasn't too bad. I warned her. So Alexander the Great conquered the known world as we understood it at the time. Now, his great contribution to the world was what we call Hellenism. Hellenism means Greek culture. It means Greek philosophy. It means Greek art. It means Greek language. Now, when he died, his territory got divided up amongst his 4 generals. Okay? Now, his 4 generals now became little small Alexander the Greats in these 4 different territories and their descendants. So if we fast forward in time till about 160 years before Martha said these words to Jesus, we end up with a king that is a king of Syria that's descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals. And I'm going to make sure I say his name right. You know how I get with the old words? Antiochus. Does it at least sound like it could be right? Antiochus. Antiochus the Fourth. Do we have his coin? Okay. And this is actually pictures of coins that have been unearthed in the Syria and Jerusalem area. Antiochus the Fourth. Now, he had a nickname, Epiphanes. I'm going to test you out here for just a minute. Okay, that's pretty good. That's pretty good, Jeanette. So if we look at the Christian calendar just for a minute, right after Thanksgiving, we get into December, we start what as far as the Christian calendar goes? It's called Advent, right? Advent takes us to the birth of, you guys are good so far. After the birth of Jesus, you have this about a 1 month time that's called Epiphany. Now, Epiphany on the Christian calendar means these are we're using this time to celebrate the times that Jesus revealed himself as God. Does that make sense? So to have, now we already know that there's a rule that you can't give yourself a nickname. You can't give yourself a nickname. There's just something wrong with that. Let alone giving yourself a nickname that means God manifest. So Antiochus the Fourth, Epiphanes, means God manifest. How does God look at people that give themselves nicknames that speak to God? Not good. Not good. Okay. So if we look at this coin here just for a minute, Annette, keep this up, but we have an image of him on the left. On the right, tell me what you see. Somebody sitting on a throne. Almost the Lady Justice. Okay, keep this up here for a minute, honey. I'll tell you when I want to switch. So, Antiochus the Fourth, one of the things that he was imposing from Syria onto the Jewish people was Hellenism. In other words, I want you to be Greek. I want you to adopt Greek culture. I want you to adopt Greek literature. I want you to adopt the Greek language. And by and large, the Jews went along with that. And then it got a little crazy. And then they started to enforce it with arms. So here's some of the things that he could no longer do. They couldn't observe the Sabbath anymore. Couldn't observe the Sabbath anymore. Jewish feast days and festivals, can't have them anymore. That would include the Passover. Can't have that anymore. Reading of the law, the Mosaic law, what we call the Old Testament, can't read that public anymore, and if we find copies of it, we're going to burn them. This was 160 years before Martha, which means it was 160 years before Jesus, okay? We find the law, we're going to burn it. Hey, you can't circumcise your male kids anymore. Can't do that. Can't do that. That's not a Greek thing to do, so you can't do that. And you know the temple sacrifices that you do? You can't do that stuff. You can't do that stuff. This picture on the coin was the final atrocity. This is a picture of Zeus in the Holy of Holies in the temple in Jerusalem, set up in the most holy place. The Jews were forced to bow down to an image of Zeus and worship him. And then they took swine, pigs, an unkosher meat, and sacrificed them on the altar of sacrifice. And then forced the Jews to eat the food. This is when the rebellion started. There was a priest and his 5 sons. And they said, we're not doing this. And when the guards showed up to force their hand, they killed the guards. And they ran to the hills. And they formed a rebel group. Guerrilla warfare began. Now, Antiochus the Fourth, we're just going to call him king of Syria. That's easier for me to say, and then I can say Syrian army, which is really easier for me to say. So as the Syrian army was trying to oppress the Jewish people, now they had to fight off guerrilla warfare from a group of priests, a family of priests, and the converts that were coming to this rebellion. Does that make sense? How many of you have seen the movie Braveheart? Quite a few of you. It's very similar to this storyline because to eradicate a culture is the same no matter what culture is trying to eradicate the other one. They don't want to kill the people. They want to kill your music. They want to kill your art. They want to kill your language. They want to kill your customs. They want to kill the instruments that you play and the sports that you play. If they can kill that, they've killed your culture. And that's what the Greeks were trying to do to the Jews. Now, Judaism was such that their culture was a culture of worshiping Jehovah. And they didn't always do it real well, but that was the culture. If you were living as a Jew, a practicing Jew, it meant you worshiped. Everybody with me, right? You could be a practicing Greek and didn't worship anything. That's the difference between secular society and Judaism. So, a Hellenistic society would be a society where you could worship stuff or not, but you couldn't worship Jehovah. Because Jehovah called you into a culture. It called you into a family. It called you into a way of life that the Greeks could not have. So this rebellion starts. Hey, let's go to the next picture real quick. Okay, this picture would be an artist's rendition of the temple in Jerusalem. All right, so the big statue that you see in the background is supposed to represent Zeus. Now, it wouldn't be completely accurate because you can't see where the curtains would be. The Holy of Holies were separated by a great curtain, but this is the artist's rendition of it. The priests are being slaughtered at the bottom of the stairs, and there is a pig on a spit being carried up to the fire. Do you guys see that? So it's just trying to represent the atrocities that were being committed within God's temple. So a rebellion starts. Next picture. No, that's Alexander the Great. You only have 3 pictures? So this family of priests that started this rebellion, that story is captured in the Maccabee stories. 1st and 2nd Maccabees is a story of this rebellion. And there's a spot I want to read to you. For those of you who've seen Braveheart, I'm connecting it to this. Do you remember the scene at the end of Braveheart where William Wallace, the hero, was laid down on that cross-shaped ulcer and was being tortured? You guys remember that part? Very end of the movie. And the executioner was trying to get him to say a word. And if he could say a word, his life would be spared. And the word that he was trying to get him to say was mercy. Asking your enemy for mercy. If he would ask his enemy for mercy, then he would be spared. But he also would be forsaken. Be forsaken. Does that make sense? So, in this scene that I'm going to read you, there's a family, 7 brothers and a mother, and they're being tortured by the evil king, by the Syrian king, and they're executioners. And they're given a last chance to say something. Now, what the executioner is wanting them to do is eat the swine. All you have to do is eat the swine, and you'll be saved. And I want to read some of the comments of what they say. One of the sons says, "You accursed wretch." Talking about the king, okay, not his mom. "You accursed wretch, you dismiss us from this present life, but the King of the universe will raise us up to an everlasting renewal of life because we have died for his laws." That brother's getting ready to be killed. Does he believe in the resurrection? Yes, he does. The next brother just watched his brother get killed. He says, "I got these from heaven, and because of his laws, I disdain them. From him, I hope to get them back again." Does that brother believe in the resurrection? Yes, he does. Next brother, "One cannot but choose to die at the hands of mortals and to cherish the hope God gives of being raised again by him." but for you, there will be no resurrection of life. I'm going to skip ahead to what the mom says. Mom just watched all of her sons get killed. Part of what she says in this her last words, she says, I do not know how you came into being in my womb, talking about her boys. It was not I who gave you life and breath, nor I who set in order the elements within each of you. Therefore, the creator of the world, who shaped the beginning of humankind and devised the origin of all things, will in his mercy give life and breath back to you, since you now forget yourselves for the sake of his laws. Did mom believe in resurrection for her boys? 160 years later, we get to this conversation with Martha. And Martha says, I know on the last day he will be resurrected to life. Even though we can't go through the Old Testament and find this eschatological stance on a resurrection, the Jews believed in a resurrection. It was the greatest debate between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Sadducees didn't believe in a resurrection, but the Pharisees did. Interestingly enough, the Pharisees were descended from the very same priests that revolted against Syria and took the country back. Martha said, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said, I am the resurrection. I am the resurrection of the last day. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said, yes, Lord, I have believed that you are the Christ, the Son of God, even he who comes into the world. Martha had a Jewish understanding of a resurrection. What's interesting is that Greek culture and many of the other cultures teach things like reincarnation, teach things like this esoteric beaming into a heaven. Okay, teach a spiritual plane of existence. But it's only Judaism and Christianity that teach a bodily, physical resurrection. It separates us from everything else. If you think about the creeds of the church, the Apostles' Creed ends with a bodily resurrection. Jesus says, I am the resurrection. That future event thing that you believe, that thing that's out there somewhere, that thing about your earthly body turning into a heavenly body, that thing about temporal things becoming eternal things, that thing about life and death where death is banished forever and life is forevermore, that thing, well, I am that thing. I am that thing. And then he says to Martha, do you believe this? And really, that's the question for us today. It isn't a question just for Martha, it's a question for us. I don't care how old you are. It's the question we have to answer every day. Jesus says, do you believe this? Do you believe it today? Because if you believe it, then we have no reason to quit the fight. If you believe it, we have no reason to quit the fight. We have no reason to beg for mercy from our enemies. We have no reason to eat the swine and forsake our faith. If you believe it, and your life is forever because of a resurrection that is Jesus, you're playing with house money. What do you got to lose? All throughout the centuries, Christians have always cried the same cry, and it's freedom. Freedom. We have the freedom to serve God no matter what. Why? Because the resurrection is true, and Jesus is that resurrection. We have the freedom to make godly choices because it's those choices that unlock the chains of others. Why? Because Jesus is the resurrection. We have the freedom to be who it is that we have been created to be. All of us have been created to be friend of God. All of us. If we're not friend of God, then we're not friend of God. I want to be friend of God. You want to be friend of God. Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this? It's the question we ask ourselves every day. Because of that, we have the strength, we have the will, we have the motivation to do those things that we need to do in His name and not our own. Lord, I love you. Lord, it amazes me that there is an event to come that we call the resurrection because of the reality of you being the resurrection right now. Lord, as I wrap my head around the fact that the resurrection is a person, and because of that person, there's an event. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord, for loving us, for being faithful to us, for fighting for us. Lord, may we never give up hope. May we hold on to that freedom. Lord, may we continue the fight against evil.